There's thunder in my stride and a boy howdy in my throat. It's time to talk about the QUESTOR SOULSWORN. Welcome to War Games on Toast, all of you lovely people. It's me, it's Toast. How are you this wonderful Wednesday? Content creators sometimes get it wrong, and when we do, it can have pretty drastic effects on the public perception of the thing that we are wrong about, such as a faction. Few warbands were as heavily shat on as the QUESTOR SOULSWORN, and as months have ticked on by, people have finally started to dabble in the Thunder laddies, and you know what? They've had some pretty darn good success. Does that make them good? I don't know. Don't worry, I do know. But today I am going to look at them and it's going to be awesome. But before we get into all of that, please consider leaving a like, a comment and subscribing, as that helps me fight against that dastardly YouTube algorithmic demon. And if you want to help support the channel in a more tangible way, then please consider joining my Patreon and my YouTube members, like all of these awesome people on screen now. You will receive cool benefits like members only content and videos, a say on future projects, and monthly giveaways and more. But with all of that out of the way, let's get on with the show.
And now for something completely different.
What's that weird title? We aren't going to do reactions first? That's right, we are going to have a sneaky gander at the unique faction passive. Boy howdy, I bet that revelation comes as a surprise to maybe one person. Yeah, QUESTOR are the only faction, that springs to mind, that has a unique passive. Why do they have one? Because the QUESTOR SOULSWORN refuse to be bottled. They are fresh from the teat and they will have it no other way. What the f*** was that line? This is a fundamental change to how you build lists in Warcry, and it is called Heroes All. This is a rather wordy rule that basically boils down to QUESTOR SOULSWORN are all heroes, and when you are using QUESTOR SOULSWORN as the base for your warband, as opposed to an ally, they ignore a bunch of restrictions. This means you can take a whopping 6 heroes or possibly even more in a QUESTOR list, provided that they are all QUESTOR. Kinda. You are still able to ally in heroes from other factions too, and that amount has not changed, so that is hard locked at 2. Oh, and if you're playing narrative, they break rules in even more ways, and that's just kind of wild. A key thing to note here is that if you are allying in QUESTOR to your list, they still count towards that limit. You can't just ally in a bunch of QUESTOR and break all the ally rules. This is purely a thing that works when you bring a QUESTOR based warband. This has other cool ramifications too though, because every single QUESTOR is a hero. It means every other order warband can ally in 1 or 2 of any of the models in this warband. Sure, the QUESTOR Prime is the prime candidate for the de facto leader, but you can take whoever you want, and spoiler, there are some pretty darn good options in this list. But with heroes all out of the way, let's hop into their reaction and their common abilities. QUESTOR have one reaction and every Tom, Dick and Harry can use it. It also just so happens to be one of the best reactions in the entire game, and one that you will revel in the use of. It is called Swift Retribution and it is on screen now. Swift Retribution spends a lot of time saying very little at the start and then rapid fires the spiciest shit imaginable. Basically, if you are clobbered by a melee attack and that attack rattles your bones back to Sigma, you can react. Then you pick another friendly fighter anywhere on the board and they get to make a bonus move or a bonus attack action. This reaction punishes your opponent for killing your laddies, and it makes losing a guy incredibly beneficial, more so than any other faction, dispossessed not included. You better believe I have purposely not activated a near-death QUESTOR who is conveniently standing in the way. I want that guy to die so I can do some pretty funky stuff elsewhere for free. By and large though, this reaction just lets you claw back at your opponent or influence the board. Oh, and this reaction does not have to target QUESTOR models at all, which means you can use this to get incredible value out of your allies as well. Very handy if you want to slam your Annihilator Prime's hammer into someone's face or slingshot Neve Black Talon up the board. Now, there are some chinks in the Thunder Forged armor that contains this reaction though. Namely, you have to have not activated that model that round. As this is a reaction, if you can't react, you don't get the chance to, well, react. Savvy players will be very careful on who they kill and when, and boy howdy, you better believe they will use the wait action to force your activations if they outnumber you. Secondly, this only works against melee attacks. You get killed by a range attack, nothing happens. You get killed by an ability, nothing happens. You get killed by being knocked off a ledge and breaking your legs, nothing happens. You jump off a ledge and land on some spikes, nothing happens.
What? No.
One last thing, be wary of any enemy who has a ranged attack profile with no minimum range, because an opponent who is paying attention will endeavour to murder your guys by taking their last wounds with that ranged weapon. In fact, I did this to a Questor player in a recent tournament with my Flameseekers, and it was great. For me, the Flameseeker player, the guy who was playing Questor, I imagine this was absolute torture. Despite its drawbacks and exploitable weaknesses, this reaction is outstanding. The fact people are playing around it specifically is an indicator of its power, and whenever you get to use it, you'll be glad your lad gave his life for the cause. Next up, we are going to talk about common abilities. That's right, abilities that all of your chaps can use. I will go over model-specific stuff when we talk about units specifically, but for now, let's dive into the universal stuff, starting with Thundering Strides, otherwise known as the WD-40 that keeps the Questor's armor squeakless. Thundering Strides is super simple. Pick a laddie within 6 inches and then that laddie gets to make a move action. Boom, done, simple, perfection, kinda sexy. Here's my number, call me. This is the sauce, the hidden ingredient, the thing that makes Questor work. This ability is so damn good that your opponent will either adapt to its existence and still forget about it from time to time, or they will get bodied by the staggering amount of mobility you now have. This ability is so good, and I say this without any shred of hyperbole, that even when outnumbered, Questor Soulsworn don't actually feel outnumbered. Well, they do if the disparity is great enough, and this very accurate graph will show when the fecals will hit the ventilation, but a lot of the time, you don't. This is the core of the Questor mod ops. ABC, always be activating models and doing bonus things. This ability lets you move ranged laddies into range to fire without having to move them. It allows you to move your melee units into melee without having to move them. It lets you move onto objectives your opponent wasn't expecting you to reach. It lets you tie up units out of nowhere. It lets you fake your opponent out and go to places they don't want you to go after they thought you were going to a place they watched you go to. It even works on allies, Sigmar be praised, and this is why Questor are taking as allies. This is why they are getting mileage in events as a 1-box. It's why you play Questor. You have an awesome double that can be popped anywhere at any time. And that's not all, we have more doubles. Okay, we've got like one more double. It's called You Won't Even Slow Me Down, and it not only sounds fucking awesome, but it's also really fucking awesome. All you gotta do, kill a lad. Did you succeed, my dude? Sigmar gifts you with free actions. Now you get to move or attack again. This is, at its core, one of those gamble abilities that often gets overlooked for Onslaught, but in Questor, you need all the actions you can get, and this helps you do that. Have you just collided with some chaff? Well, you better believe you can cut right through them and then kill some more lads. How about your Relictor blowing someone up at a range? Well, now he can fire again, or move to get into range to fire again. Again, there are a lot of applications for this, and as a generic double, they can all use. You just love to see it. But enough gushing about generics, let's move on to the units, and we will start with Captain Underwhelming himself, the Questor Prime. This lad is pretty darn meh. Of all the Questor that get shat on, this is the lad who deserves it the most. He has the universal Questor defense of toughness 5 and 20 wounds, which we will never mention again, probably, backed by a really underwhelming damage line. 4424 is kinda almost fine, but for 170 points, I just can't stomach it. I do like the range 2 though. He comes with a unique triple and is called Searing Light, and yeah, it's kinda good sometimes. It does a flat 3 damage to all visible enemies within 3 inches, and that's kinda snazzy. If you're fighting a Horde warband, this makes it so much easier to deal with because you're doing big boomba AoE to lots of things. 3 damage isn't a lot against an ogre, but 3 damage against a tarantulas brood spider swarm, or against a horde of skeletons, it's kind of okay. And the more you hit, the more value you generate. Look, my biggest issue with this laddie is that he just doesn't do enough on the tabletop compared to everyone else most of the time. Other Questor have better stats, and other Questor also end up just being cheaper. He's okay, kinda, maybe. I just wouldn't run another one myself, probably ever again. Wake up, honey. Games Workshop just released the Questor Prime, but good!
Oh my god, you're such a fucking nerd. Did it in one?
Yeah! When it comes to taking the aforementioned Questor Prime, my mind always wanders to the Grand Blade. Why? Because he largely does the same thing, but he does it without dice and has the scope to do more if he uses dice. Rocking up with 4524, the Grand Blade ends up being kinda solid. He has enough attacks to blend a lot of chaff, his strength is high enough to blend a lot of chaff, and he does all this for 5 points cheaper than the Prime. Now granted, he does lose access to range 2 on his melee attacks, but he does gain something else with the force of a Thunderbolt. This thing is a double and it is awesome. Or is it? Maybe it sounds awesome. A common dub with the Questor. This thing grants a bonus attack action provided that they have finished a move action within 1 inches of 2 or more enemy fighters. This rewards your Grand Blade for being an aggressive dickhead by letting him be aggressive and kill things. Again, this is perfect for mulching through chaff. And because of this, I really enjoy using the Grand Blade. I even enjoy him more than some of the other Questor who have access to with the force of a Thunderbolt, which should ring some alarm bells because there are more of them. That's right, and the errant Questor with Grand Spear is not one of them. In fact, the Grand Spear has nothing. Well, it has no unique abilities or anything that separates it from being a lad with a humongous shaft. The draw of this laddie is their spear. This is a range 3 3525 spear that is really good. Range 3 is always good, and having a profile like that on a spear is kind of awesome. The Grand Spear is just good to have on your roster to control space. Even if they can't get as fancy as other laddies, they still get to use Thundering Strides, they still get to use You Won't Even Slow Me Down. So don't forget about that when your mind starts drifting when playing this vanilla laddie. I nearly always take 1 spear, and I have only regretted it about 20% of the time, and we take those wins. And now we are back with Force of a Thunderbolt. The errant Questor with Grand Axe is, in a single word, disappointing. Is it because he is bad? No. Is it because he is average? No. Is it because he is good? What? No. The Grand Axe is disappointing because it fills this middle ground nobody really wanted filled. Like a ring donut whose hole is now covered in custard, or a bagel that is turned into circular bread. With the range 2 3525, you are basically getting a Grand Spear, but worse. But to offset the worse, you do get to use with the force of a Thunderbolt, but you get to do it less good than everyone else. The Grand Blade does more damage and is just better at killing chaff, and the lad we're going to talk about soon more or less falls into the same category of just doing more damage. So this lad is just disappointing because he is actually okay, but he doesn't have the range of the spear, doesn't have the attacks of the blade, and doesn't do the things a mysterious other Questor can do as well as that lad. So are we going to talk about that laddie now? No, we're going to talk about the errant Questor duelist with twin blades. This lad makes me feel things I didn't know that I could. At first glance, he looks awful, dreadful even. His offensive stats are just kind of odd. 5-4-2-3 is a profile that many have and will continue to scoff at, and then they'll just move on from. I mean, he's just not that great when you have other lads doing more. But that ignores his price, and that ignores his ability. Face Me Cowards is an ability like no other, and I mean that. Not only does it sound cool when you say it out loud, again, a common dub right there, but it does things in a unique and permanent way. At first glance, you will likely miss what this ability does. I did. Nearly everyone did. Content creators the world over missed it because nobody mentioned it. Face Me Cowards is simple. You pop it, and now enemies who start the activation within 3 inches of you can no longer move away from your twin blade, and if they're engaged, they can't disengage. Now importantly, that disengage part means you can't disengage from anyone, not just the twin blade, and that's some useful tech right there. But the real tech of this ability is that it never turns off. It has no section telling you when this ability ends. Very few abilities do this. Only one springs to mind in the entire game, and that's the berserk stuff that Ogroid Thaumaturge gets to dabble with from the Arcanites of Tzeentch. This means once your twin blade uses this triple once, he never needs to use it again. It is active the entire game or until he is dead, and that is incredibly valuable. Not to mention, the ability itself is ludicrously good. This lets the twin blade do all kinds of insane stuff. I'm going to go over just 2 common examples, and you can go away and discover even more, because there is an incredible amount of utility packed into this triple, and it helps the Questor win all kinds of games. Example 1, run into a bunch of guys who are not on an objective, maybe a deployment zone, and then lock them all down. That's it. I have caught 3, even 4 models with this, and now they have 2 options. They either attack the duelist or they do nothing. Now they will often just opt to move in and then attack you, but you are pretty durable and it will take a fair amount of chaff to grind you down. Against the right opponent, you could stand here for 2, even 3 turns. And I have done this many times. If you keep a third of their warband locked down for 2 turns, you have such a humongous advantage for the rest of the game. If you do it for 3 turns, bearing in mind they're deploying onto the board on turn 2, they don't get to do anything. And again, this is fairly easy to set up if you are dedicated to getting this pulled off. Example 2 is running behind units who are trying to push onto an objective and then tagging them all with Face Me Cowards so they can no longer legally move towards that objective for the rest of the game, like literally ever. Well, they could just kill you, but in this scenario, like before, they would need to move into combat to do that, so your survivability skyrockets for that turn, and you can just move away next turn, right? Do this forever. They'll be forced to chase you. You lasso them across the board. Think of this AoE as a large scale net, a disruption tool that once active is always active. Think of the duelist model you are happy to let die because he is serving a greater purpose. If he has locked down even 2 models for a couple of turns, he has gained astronomical value. The more models you lock down, the better. And he's not even bad in combat. With that many attacks, you will eat through chaff, especially if you add +1 strength or +1 crit, which is my preferred method. Heck, you might even opt to not do that because if you die, you just react and other guys get to do other things. The Twin Blade is a game changer, an unsung hero that more people need to use. He has been overlooked since launch, and that has to change because the Questor does not work as a 1-box as effectively if he's not in the faction. He is literally the beating heart of the Questor, the reason they are able to compete at all in objective missions. He's a top tier lad and a phenomenal ally that nobody uses. But where do we go from here? That's right, more Thunderbolt caddies, baby. The errant Questor with Grand Hammer is a total Chad. 3634 is a great profile, and whilst only having range 1 is kinda bad, you have Thundering Strides and with Force of a Thunderbolt to bypass all of that. This guy is your can opener, your threat killer. Where everyone else is doing okay against most things, this guy is doing great things against everyone. Just get to swinging and you are going to have a good time. I have ran lists with 3 of these guys, and I have seen lists who run even more. They are always great. To me, if the duelist is the beating heart of a list, these guys are the backbone, the lads who just do work and do it consistently. There's not much else to say because they just do what the other lads do, only with a really big hammer. And finally, we get to the Knight Relictor. This guy, man, this guy is just kind of excellent. 3434 is a solid profile thanks to the high minimum damage. Having a range attack with 2435 is also excellent and is even better if you add on +1 strength for 15 points. That range profile also has no minimum range, allowing him to fire into combat if he has to. Throw in his quad translocation and now your guys are going all over the shop occasionally. It only works on Stormcast, but that's okay because it also works on himself. Teleportation abilities are always very powerful, and whilst his is very expensive, you better believe I have used translocation more than I have used Rampage when I play Questor. The Knight Relictor is just a real jack of all trades. He has access to all the fun tricks of any other Questor, comes with his own tricks to boot, and projects threat uniquely and can even fight in melee if he has to. He's just an all-around solid bloke, and I nearly always take one. Normally I would go into allies in this section, but that's kind of weird for Questor because their models are rather expensive, and allies for them often just beg the question, why not just ally the Questor into that faction instead? And honestly, that question is often answered by, yeah, that's actually a great idea. Questor really like to be allied everywhere. Thundering Strides, the bulk, even the damage output, they provide a lot for a reasonable price. If you're going to ally something into Questor, I would recommend something cheap so you can maintain that 6-man band status, and Dispossessed are my first go-to here. Really, any of them work. This is because Over My Dead Body is incredibly powerful and further helps with the Questor's body count. Over My Dead Body combined with Face Me Cowards gives you a staggering amount of play in objective games. Just be aware that the dwarfs are slow and you might have to give them either a movement blessing or dedicate Thundering Strides to make sure they're keeping up with your much faster Questor. So with allies being a little bit of a wash due to the nature of Questor, let's look at 2 lists that I really enjoy playing. Starting off, we have just Questor. This might be awkward to build with one box, but it's a lot of fun to mess around with, and in my opinion, it strikes the perfect balance of tricks and hits. We take a Soulsworn Knight Relictor, an errant Questor with Grand Spear, 3 errant Questor with Grand Hammers, and of course, the errant Questor with Twin Blades. This is your standard 6-man list that can do everything you want in Questor. You have the core backbone of 3 hammers, usually 1 in each group. You have your ranged and teleport support with the Relictor. You have the utility of a ranged 3 stabby laddie in the spear, and of course, Manu Fetish, the Twin Blade for all of your Twin Blade needs. You even have 10 points left, and I recommend just putting +1 crit on that Twin Blade for some more melee output. You can also drop the spear for a Warden King and then put some more blessings on more people, perhaps +1 strength on the Knight Relictor. The spear is the flex slot here, so change that last out for whatever you want. I love this list and I run it all the time. It is so much fun, it is really easy to pilot, it's super effective, knock yourself out. This is my gift to you. Now, I lied. This isn't actually a Questor list, this is a Black Talon list. but I had to include it because I love it. It is a 5-man list and it runs Neve Blacktalon, Rostus Oxenhammer, Lorai, the Child of the Abyss, an errant questor with twin blades and a soulsworn Knight Relictor. You have 30 points left over and you absolutely slap +1 damage on Neve, and then you have a really good time murdering everything. Despite the small size of this list, it is shockingly competent at winning objective games, purely because it has the speed, the damage, and the tricks to lock things down. You just kill chaff and get to places. It's great. Its success largely rests on the twin blade and your acceptance that you aren't going to be winning on turn 1, maybe not even on turn 2. You are looking to stymie the flow of point loss and then finish out on top. In kill missions, you have enough threats here to do work. Neve in particular, with 3-4 damage on her attacks with the endless free moves and free attacks because Roster says hi, is amazing. Throw in Lorai and the Relictor for some high damage range stuff and even durability buffs, and the list just feels great to play. Is it competitive though? I don't know. I haven't actually ran this at an event, but I love to play it against anything, and you should absolutely try it. Overall, I love Questor. They make for outstanding allies, with any of them being ideal for so many order lists because of their great abilities and stats. They also make for a wonderfully cerebral warband to play if you run them as the base warband. There is so much you can do, and every turn is this puzzle that is begging to be solved. They are disgustingly underrated, and I hope I have helped restore some of their grace in some way. You just have to give these guys a go. And if we take a little step back and we look at peak competitive play, do they work competitively? You can absolutely do well with Questor as a single self-contained faction, but, and it is a big but, you have to use the old calcium cage more than you think, and that's because your warband at a base struggles to deal with massive hordes, and it struggles to deal with highly elite killy things. You will have to work your ass off, or more accurately, your brain off, using things like the dispossessed allies or using face me cowards to offset this heavily. You will need to use your brain more than your muscles if you want to get good with Questor in the competitive scene, but it is absolutely doable. We have seen some Questor success in tournaments in the UK meta, and we have seen Questor allies crop up everywhere. So they are obviously very good, they just haven't had the full range of experimentation due to people just throwing them under the bus early and then just never really trying until now, which is really cool. So is it possible? Yes. Is it hard? Maybe. Is it a flex? Absolutely. Questor look elite but act mid-range and play like 5D chess. It's kind of awesome. And that's it. That's the end of the video. If you like what you saw, please consider leaving a like, a comment, and subscribing. And as always, a huge shout out to my patrons and members who help support the channel, and a massive shout out to all of my algorithmic demon slayers: Armor Enthusiast 7, Brioche, CT6497, Girth Demon, Head Knight of Paint, Heinz D, Key Plang, Long Run Hobbies, Lord Filax, Tough, Tootin, Baby, and Velas. Until next time, lads, ladies, and everyone in between and beyond. Ta-ra.
C.